so much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Shiv Sundar. I'm a founder and CEO of Esper, based in the US. There's a recurring theme that came across when we were meeting a lot of founders, especially people from Indian founders from Chennai, Bangalore, Pune, Delhi, right? I think like we're building great products. We are building even category-creating products. We're having some initial customers in the India market. We're getting funding is great, but I think how do we capture the US go-to-market? A little bit about me. Esper is my first startup. Started both based out of Bangalore and Silicon Valley. Very fortunate, we were able to scale to 10 million ARR in 3 years. 90% of those customers are from the US. And the key thing in that success was we actually had majority of our go-to-market teams out of Bangalore. Like we had some sales folks in the US, but I think we did a lot of it from Bangalore. You'll see Neha speak, she runs marketing for Esper. So we had some conversations with founders. We were talking to VCs like, hey, a lot of our early stage founders are making a breakthrough. They're even cracking like Asian countries, but how do we sustain that growth, crack the US market, and actually build a very, very scalable business? Because the products are really, really well. Like, put it in other ways, it's like, how can every startup that is out of India have the same go-to-market momentum that Freshworks had, right? How did a Chennai-based startup actually go and build a like $100, $200, $300 million ARR, and still a significant portion of their team is based out of India? I'm very excited to actually, so what I did then is like I pitched this idea to a couple of founders. It's like, hey, I want to put together a workshop, first of its kind, in the Bangalore ecosystem for founders, and what do you guys think? And I got phenomenal reception. We have like 3 founders of very, very exciting startups. There is a correlation between what they are building and around go-to-market channels for US, right? They're actually building tools to enable SaaS businesses crack one go-to-market channel focused on the US, right? They are the experts in the field. I've been talking to Sri, Rohit, Ashish for the last 4 months. In fact, at least for Ashish and Sri, we are actually using the tools that they've built in our go-to-market stack to scale the business, right? So we are actually seeing the benefit, and the idea here is like they share what they're building and how they can scale your business and take it to the next level, right? That is the idea here. We have a great set of speakers. So the agenda here is this, right? I think we're going to start off what we called as ICP. In many ways, it's like who's your target persona or a target person you're selling to? It could be the Indian market, it could be the US market. What is the target persona? So Ashish will help guide the discussion. And then Sri, I mean, like I've talked to Sri almost for 6 months. I love his LinkedIn posts. I learn a lot every time, and I copy paste his LinkedIn post and send it to my marketing team. It's like, why are we not talking about our customers like this, right? Sri has phenomenal insights around inbound, right? I think in general, when we go inbound, we kind of think about it as like, hey, let's write some contents, buy some ads, or even get SEO working, and that's inbound. But Sri is looking at it in a completely different perspective, right? How do you set up inbound, measure it, and scale it reliably at different phases of your company, right? Like how do you measure everything that you do for inbound? That's what Sri is going to talk about. Sri is the CEO and founder of Factors.ai. Next, we have Neha from Esper. Little story there. I think like we were 1.5 years into the business, end of our seed stage, and we had to get to like a revenue milestone to raise the next round. Neha bootstrapped a very, very economical paid search campaign for us that helped us get the first 10 customers and help us get the first $1 million in revenue without actually like breaking a bank, right? Very, very effective Google search campaigns that can actually drive your first set of customers and first set of leads. So she's going to talk about like how to effectively kickstart your paid acquisition through Google search. One of the biggest buzzwords after Bitcoin is PLG, right? Everybody wants to be a bottoms-up sales motion, like product sells by itself. Yes, it does in certain instances, But there is actually some secrets to unraveling how to drive PLG really, really well and how to actually convert your free customers into paying customers, right? Like oftentimes, if you go talk to a SaaS company running PLG motion, I have 5,000 free customers. That's great, but how much of them are paying, right? And will they actually pay if you ask them to pay, right? That is the biggest challenge we have. Rishan and Rohit have founded this phenomenal company. Rohit is here to talk about a definitive strategy on how to convert your free customers into paying customers, right? Rohit and Rishan are obsessed about PLG motion, and they've built a phenomenal company out of Bangalore, right? I mean, both Sri and Rohit are building these kind of tools and technologies out of Bangalore. So for founders who are building companies here, you actually have access not only to their mind share, their thought process, they are available here who are building the same set of tools, right? The goal here is to like tap into their expertise in those particular domain and help accelerate your growth journey. Finally, I think my favorite go-to-market is channel go-to-market. I love selling into channels, into distributors, into partners, into the ecosystem. Contrary to all the notions about get your channel strategy when you get 10 million ARR, we actually got 50% of our revenue in the first $1 million from channel partners. So we started channel like on day one. So I think I'm going to talk about very few things on how to think about channel. I think my walk-away thought is like when you go back, do not wait for channel to be like a strategy for when you're at the ARR, right? At the get-go, think about how your product is being sold, how your competitor's product is being sold, who's buying it, what does the distribution channel look like? That is a key takeaway. My fundamental goal in putting together this workshop, we hustled the last few days to get everything content here, thanks to Chameli and Sasson Jiraiya, is like, we want to put together an open playbook for all founders to sell into the US market, right? There is nothing in it for us. We are not here to sell any products. It's purely like Indian founders are building phenomenal products, and I think a product is as good as its distribution, right? Distribution is key to every product's success, and I think we are here to democratize what it takes to succeed in the US market, right? Thank you so much for joining. It's great to see a full house. Over to you, Ashish.
Thank you, Shiv. I'm excited to be here. My name is Ashish Damdere, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Relevo. This is actually my 5th startup. So let me start here. Why should you listen to me? Why should you spend your hard-earned time listening to me today? It's because I've done this 4 different times. You might be surprised to see Microsoft up there, and you might think that's not a startup, except I was a part of an incubation product called Red Dog, which ended up becoming Azure. So I was one of the first 100 people to work on that product at Microsoft. Then I went to Apptio, which was in the news recently, just got bought by IBM. It had a phenomenal run. I was at Amperity, which is a customer data platform. I was the first VP of marketing, went from 0 to roughly 10 million in revenue. Skilljar, which we took from Series A to a Series B, so it was roughly 1.5 to about 12 in revenue. And now I'm at Relevo. All of these companies are US-based. And what I'm most excited about is to come in and share some of the secrets that I've learned in this journey. What I've seen is many, many great products don't make it, not because the product's not good, it's because the go-to-market, they miss a few tricks and they get a bit distracted and they don't invest their resources in a strategic manner. So let me share my mistakes so you don't make those mistakes, make better, newer mistakes, and learn from what I've done. Some of those things I'll tell you to do, some of those things I'll tell you not to do. If you go to the next slide. Fantastic, so what am I gonna talk about? What I'm gonna talk about is the goal is to give you an actionable framework that you can use in your go-to-market motions. Before I get started, show of hands, how many people here have a paid product in market today? Awesome. How many people are $1 million in ARR or above? Awesome. How many people have a US go-to-market of some sort, even if it's early? Okay, phenomenal. So the lessons that I'll share will be mostly for, let's assume, somewhere north of 0 to 5 million odd in revenue. If you're beyond that stage, the lessons will still apply, but these are mostly relevant for the earlier stage founders. Is there anyone here with more than 10 million in ARR? Okay, a couple people, great, fantastic. There are still lessons that apply here, but most of these will be for the earlier stage founders. So if you go to the next slide. Growth, when you think about a startup, is all about finding your niches, right? It's all about finding the smallest possible group of people that have the problem that you're trying to solve. And this is tricky because when you go talk to investors, the first thing they ask you is, what's your TAM? Right? And you have to tell a story about, oh, it's $1 billion TAM, it's a $50 billion TAM, it's $1 trillion TAM. Great, all of that's right. But when it comes to growth, that is not the strategy that you want to follow. Less is more. Let that sink in, because that's not an intuitive model, right? Intuitively, you think, I'm going to try and reach as many people as possible. Yes, as many people as possible, as long as they have a specific pain that you can solve, and as long as they share that specific pain. The hardest thing, the biggest mistake you can make is you don't have a lot of resources when you're early stage. And that's not just money, right? It's time, it's energy. Because a lot of times, as a co-founder, you're sitting there trying to figure out the go-to-market. So if you make too many bets, or if you make too broad a bet, that's going to hold you back. So the jump here is to think about, let's say you want to get to $1 million in revenue. It's some basic math. Let's say the ARR you're shooting for is 50,000, right? $50,000 ACV for a particular deal. You need 20 customers. You want to work backwards from that number. You want to say, we want to get to 20 paying customers in the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever, 2.5 years. Let's do some math to figure out how many conversations we need to have to get to those 20 paying customers. And in the early days, a lot of these people will be people you know, people that you're connected to through your network. Referrals work really, really well, super early stage. But even there, it's super important to know your ICP. I'm going to pause, by the way. If you have any questions, please ask. Because if you have a question, I'm guessing somebody else has that question too. I'll pause. Any questions on what I've shared so far? If you think I'm full of shit, tell me. And we can have that conversation too. Challenge questions are always good to talk through. Okay, so the goal here is, let's say you're at 100K in ARR, you want to find out where are the next 10 customers going to come from, the next 5, and then break down, to get those 5 customers, how many conversations do we need? 20, roughly, right? Have a funnel. First meetings, you know what the conversion rate looks like. You go talk to people, in about half the cases, they'll be like, yeah, this is interesting, let's go forward. Great. Do the math, figure out how many conversations do you need to have. Everything that I'm going to share from here on out will break down how to focus on the right group of people for those early conversations. So if you go to the next slide. How many people here have some fundamental understanding of an ICP? Great. So, this is the traditional definition. And what it really comes down to, the 2 words that I like the most are best fit. These are not all of your customers. These are not any customers. It's best fit. It's when you sit down and you think about, why did we create this product? You have this particular person in mind, this particular company in mind. And it all comes back to, what's the problem that you're solving? What's the unique problem that you're solving? And what makes your solution the best possible solution for that particular customer? That's what it comes down to, right? It's easy. A lot of times when you go in, I'm not going to name any names, but if you ask people, you say, what's your ICP? Well, it's B2B SaaS companies. I'm sure you've heard this answer. Well, it's B2B SaaS companies. Wrong answer. Wrong answer. Why? Can anybody hazard why it's a wrong answer? Any guesses?
Too broad.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Too broad. B2B SaaS is millions of organizations. Well, how is that actionable? That's not really actionable. The key metric to think about is, if you want to sell to anyone, you're going to have a really hard time. You got to figure out who you're going to sell to. So how do we do it? Great. Let's get into it. If you go to the next slide. Fantastic. This is why you should care about this, right? A 68% higher win rate when you have an ICP. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to solve every particular question that's out there. But if you have some idea of an ICP and it's woven into your selling process, your win rates get dramatically better. And I'll get into a few other things that get better with it. I'll also talk a little bit about symptoms of problems that tell you that you need to focus on your ICP and on solving that particular problem. I'll pause here. Any questions to this point? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Smith. target audience is very large. Let's say I'm building a cybersecurity product.
Yep.
And as a cybersecurity is a need of an hour for every company. Okay?
Yep.
Every IT-enabled company. So in that sense, my ICP is very wide.
Yes.
Okay. How should I particularly target to a particular ICP?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you help me with that?
Absolutely. Well, I'll give you, I don't know your specific products. I'll give you a mental model. Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for being brave enough to ask the very first question. It always matters a lot. A good way to think about it is every company needs a cybersecurity product, but there's a cybersecurity stack, right? It's not one product doesn't meet the needs of every possible company. What you have to think about is what companies are trying to solve the problem where your specific product is top of mind for them. I know a little bit about cybersecurity, right? So I'll tell you an answer. Is this an endpoint protection product or is it an agentless,
This is basically a full stack vulnerability assessment and penetration testing product.
Got it.
Where we are going to automate multiple digital assets like the website, web application, a SaaS application, the API, Android, iOS application, thick client, cloud, and network.
Got it.
All under one particular.
Got it. Got it. So you have actually a clue right there, which is if you're rolling up what other people would buy independently, what you have to think about is who's looking for an all-up solution versus best-in-class solutions that could do any one of those problems. And again, I can't give you the answer, but I can give you a few questions to think through, which is if you go talk to an enterprise company about this, my gut tells me that may not be the right approach because they probably already have an existing tech stack that you have to rip and replace, right? So the question is, well, it's probably not an enterprise. It's probably a SMB or mid-market company that you have to go through. What I'll share now is what questions you have to ask about attributes that help you figure out that specific niche, the smallest possible niche to get to. In fact, let's get to that in next.
You want more answers or you're good?
I'm still evaluating. I'm still.
Okay, you can come back.
We'll come back to you.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
you have more questions, we'll come back and ask.
There's actually an exercise here, and what we should do is have you think through that exercise, and if you're brave enough, we can discuss the answers. And I'll make the open offer to other people too. We can probably do 2 or 3 case studies where I'll give you the questions. Let's look at what the answers look like, okay? So, again, do any of these things look familiar to you? You don't have to raise your hands. What we've seen is these are the typical symptoms that your ICP is not as clear as it could be, right? We're going to talk about outbound later today. That's typically the biggest problem that comes up. When people are like, yeah, we have inbound, we're getting good referral deals, but the minute we start cold outbound conversations, they don't go anywhere. That's number one. Number 2 is small deals. This hurts because again, you don't have a lot of bandwidth, right? You go and close a few deals. You get to the finish line and the deal ends up being half of what you expect it to be, a quarter of what you expect it to be, and you've spent a lot of time trying to close that deal. You want to avoid that. Your ROI numbers have to be high enough. So that's the second thing. Churn is also typically a sign that your ICP is not where it needs to be. You got the deal, they paid, the problem they're trying to solve is not the problem that you're solving. And they sort of figured that out. Onboarding, right? We've all been in these conversations where you close the deal, you're excited, you walk in and you realize, oh God, they don't even have this problem. Or it's not top of mind. They have 5 problems that are actually bigger problems that they're trying to solve, that they would have to solve before your product becomes relevant. So keep an eye on these things because each of these things fundamentally is an ICP problem. You can try to solve it a bunch of different ways, but if you don't solve ICP, these problems won't get solved. If you go to the next slide, on the other hand, if you solve it, all of these things start moving in the right direction. And the metric I look at most closely is pipeline velocity. When you have that first conversation, how quickly does that meeting become an opportunity? How quickly do they go, let's go and try to solve this problem? That to me is the number one sign that you've started getting closer to your ICP, right? For you, for example, if you go have a conversation and they're like, yeah, this looks kind of interesting, come back in a month, as opposed to, hey, this looks really interesting, can we do a POC? This looks really interesting, can we do a demo, right? When the prospect starts leaning in, that tells you you've started hitting something that's of value. So that's the thing to look at. Clearly, deal size and all the other things matter, of course, but they're more lagging indicators, so you should look at them. But it's really these first 2 that matter a ton. So let's talk about how do we define the ICP. We have 10 minutes. I'm going to rush through a couple of things. This is your traditional definition of an ICP. How big is the company? What industry? What geography? What does their tech stack look like? Show of hands, how many people have done some version of this? Great. It's a great place to start. It's a great place to start. The one thing it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't tell you specifically what attributes can you attach to. What are the buying triggers? What are the initiatives? What are the pains that you're trying to attach to solve these specific problems? So the model that I like better is the next slide, which gets into active ICP. And let's spend maybe 4 minutes on this one. So what the active ICP model does is it takes your traditional definitions of firmographic and technographic attributes, it layers on challenges. So again, let's use your example. How do we know that this particular company is trying to solve some of the problems that your product solves, right? And you have to think about not cybersecurity broadly. Who wants a single suite solution? My guess is it means they have 1 or 2 people doing security, maybe 1 person. That 1 person doesn't want to manage 10 different tools, right? They have a budget constraint. It's probably some combination of those things. So that's how you want to define your challenges. Notice I said persona first, right? So this is like, who's the person we're selling to? What's the specific problem that they have? And how many people are in this, have this problem at that particular company? In fact, for you, a disqualifier might be if they have more than 2 people in the security function, probably not a good fit. I'm making this up. I don't know your product clearly, right? But it's probably some sense of this is a one-person product where they don't have to think about this. You automate a lot of their pains. So that could fit in that specific case. The second one is use cases or jobs to be done. And this is particularly important when you're trying to do category creation. When you have a product that there is no competition, right? People are doing this in spreadsheets, or they're writing their own tools, or they're doing it on whiteboards, or they're not even trying to solve this particular problem. This is where you have to think very carefully about what's the job to be done? What are they actually trying to do here? And can we pick up some signs that they have an initiative to solve this particular problem in the organization? And if you do, your deals will move a lot faster at that point. The last one is buying triggers, and I'll give you 2 simple ones. One is, have they had an exec that typically solves this problem? Have they had a CMO, a CISO, a CRO, right? A head of customer success that cares about churn? Great buying trigger. A second one is, are they hiring for a bunch of people in that function? Again, that tells you they're trying to invest for that function. A third one is, are people on LinkedIn at that company suddenly sharing a lot of things that relate to your problem or the solution that you have? All of these are signs that when you combine them with firmographic and technographic details, give you actionable segments that you can go after. If you're super early stage, a lot of this will be your gut feel. You don't have data, really, right? But you have a lot of good gut feel on this. If you're north of 500K, you'll suddenly start getting data on this. And that's where it gets super interesting. So if you go to the next slide, that's where you can first identify these folks that have active pains, needs, initiatives. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is look at what the pipeline data looks like. Are you actually booking meetings? Are those meetings becoming opportunities? Are those opportunities becoming deals? If they are, you can tweak your signals. You can update your signals based on that holistic data. Third is you want to refresh this every quarter at least when you're early stage, because your product changes, your positioning gets updated, gets sharper. Competition comes up all the time. Market conditions change, right? The Fed changes interest rates in the US all the time. So you have to keep a close eye on that and refresh it. And fourth is ICP is a bit of a misnomer. It's really ICPs, right? You typically have 1 or 2, maybe even 3 sometimes that you want to go after. Not too many. You don't want to make the mistake of going after 6 segments at the same time, but 2 to 3 is pretty common, right? Again, for you, I'll make this up. It's possible that you're going after manufacturing companies that are around $100 million in revenue that are based in the Midwest as one, and 2 could be multinational, pharma companies that are doing biotech, that are somewhat smaller, that have some sort of an outsourced function. So these are like 1 or 2 segments that you want to go after. And again, it'll be a combination of gut and what the data is telling you. I'll pause here. We have 6 minutes. I have an exercise. Any questions? Yeah, please.
How do you think in the early days, especially from 0 to 1, about turning down customers that don't come to your ICP?
This is a tough question. There are 2 things to think about. One is, have you had enough conversations to know that what you're building is really what the market needs, right? So do you have data on this? Not just belief, because as founders, you always have belief. You wouldn't be a founder if you didn't have belief. But is there any data that backs up your belief? If that data exists, it becomes a bit of an easier conversation. And if that market is big, clearly, that matters. On the other hand, if it's early days, where you're like, I kind of have a sense for this, but I don't know if I can say no, then it becomes this explore versus exploit balancing, where maybe you don't want to say no, right? I can't give you, there's no black and white answer. It's combination.
I I think the first 5 customers, if they are not asking to change your product or your vision, I think you should be willing to do some features or do some custom work. I think be very flexible. Maybe it could be a pricing structure or it could be a different market, but I think that will help you lead into like, is it repeatable? Like, are the same set of customers coming back again? I think I would say saying no in the early days is like not the right answer. I'll be very direct on that. It's like you have to, because what you have is a vision as a founder. You've built a product. Maybe you've raised money, but the customers want to buy. The question there is like, are they willing to pay for those customization? Are they willing to buy first and wait, right? If they're able to pay money for what they're asking for, you got to go for it.
I agree. A lot of it is also, think about, you started the company to solve a particular problem. How companies solve that problem may vary, and you may have run into a new use case where you're still solving the problem that you believe is the right problem to solve, but maybe the way to solve it is slightly different in that case. So that's something to think through. Again, I'm talking in broad generalizations because there's no one answer to these things, right? A lot of it depends on how much data do you have, and do you have a mental model where if you've made a mistake, you can go back and fix it. That's the most important thing, is knowing what assumptions you've made. Okay, if you go to the next slide, how you put your ICP to work is what the rest of this workshop is going to get into, which is once you figure out these are the accounts that we want to go after, then you can have a social media conversation, then you can have a paid conversation, then you can have a PLG, like focusing on what PLG accounts you want to convert, outbound, all of these things flow from there. Typically, you can think about all go-to-market as being 3 things. This is very broad. It's accounts, it's personas and contacts, and it's messaging, right? It's those 3 things. And the channels sort of fall into the 4th thing. Account mistakes are the hardest mistakes to fix. Because if you get that wrong, every step that follows compounds those investments. If you get the accounts wrong, you could get the contacts just right. The messaging could be spot on, but you're going after the wrong companies. It doesn't matter. So you want to spend a lot of time thinking very carefully about accounts first, and then go from there, right? That's the step. What I have next is a list of questions that you can look at on the next slide, Shiv. Thank you. This is what, if you want to take a crack, you can take a picture of this. I can send you this deck too. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll put up my contact information. My name's pretty distinctive. You can find me. These are the questions you have to ask yourself. And what I would offer up is, if you want to do a little bit of time, spend a little bit of time and go through these in my outbound session, I can start there as a point and say, here's how you would take these triggers and convert them into an outbound campaign. So these are the questions. We have 2 more minutes. Any questions on any of these questions that you want me to get into, that you want me to focus on for the last 2 minutes? Is this useful at all? Okay, good. Good. I don't want to speak in broad generalizations, but we only have 30 minutes, so I want to give you just enough where you know what you're going to do differently.
Hi.
Yes.
My name is Kadan, and we are into retail automation. So, we have been working on the ICP for last 1 year. First, we tried, people who have turnover from 5 CR to 500 CR.
Okay.
Right? Then we tried people who have, 10 employees to, let's say 100 employees.
Yep.
Then we figured out that, employee doesn't matter, who have that skill set to in terms of managing that retail automation. Then we figured out that, who is active on Instagram, Facebook doing, because those people will only, invest in retail automation.
Yes.
But, there are people from tier 3, tier 4, who doesn't care about automation. They are comfortable with their Facebook,
Manual
Instagram,
process.
right? Then we identified which are the top websites in India, who would like to do that. But yet, after all these things, we don't have a clear answer in terms of who exactly needs this.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So, yeah, please tell me.
So where are you from a revenue perspective or from a number of customer perspective?
So we have around 180 customers.
That's great.
And from revenue perspective, we are close to $1 million.
That's amazing.
But yeah, we...
Amazing. That's amazing. So you're being hard on yourself. You've made a lot of progress.
Yeah, but
yes.
Yet we don't have a process in-house where, our team have clarity that, okay, this customer, this messaging, because every customer is coming with different mindset.
Yes.
Right? People, let's say there are somebody who has 10 showrooms and they are doing a business of 50 crores. But somebody who has 1 showroom and they are doing a business of 100 crores.
Yeah.
Right? So identifying that exact pitch.
Yes.
Right? Like example, we also went to a level where, okay, who is the next generation?
Yeah.
Or, who are from engineering or commerce background.
Yeah.
right? We tried to find that data and we engaged with them.
Yeah.
We were more surprised that, those people are more confused in terms of what to do, right? And people who had that conviction कि अच्छा कुछ try करना है,
Right.
they were fast on decision making.
Right.
But even there, that was a problem because that took a lot of our time and bandwidth in terms of training and onboarding.
Makes sense.
So in terms of not just finding that ICP,
Yeah.
we have probably founded 20 different ICPs. But identifying which exactly works, because there's
Yeah.
no ratio that, okay, this 180 comes into which bucket.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you, your problem is actually way more solvable, tractable than most people's because you have 180 customers. You have a lot of data points. What it's going to come down to is what you were getting into, which is what unique data points do you need to look up for your customers and then cluster your pipeline and your customers based on those data attributes. And some of these data attributes are not easy for you to look up. That's sort of the problem we've taken on to solve. You can't go to a Zoom Info or any of the other tools and just pull a list that gives you these answers. It's a brainstorming session where you have to say, the answers to these questions is the data you need to collect for all the accounts you've reached out to. And then do a clustering analysis that says, here are the 3 or 4 clusters that are a combination of number of employees, revenue, geographical location, type of product sold, titles, and what people are saying on LinkedIn, what they're saying on their website.
5% each ICP.
No,
So how you would deal with it?
No. You don't want to do that. That's not an ICP, right? What you want ideally is 70% of your marketing dollars are going towards this one segment because that's the one that's most promising. And you'll test 2 or 3 other segments that could be of promise, that could be the future. That's the explore, exploit combination you want to get to. You would have to look at the data to figure out, maybe it's 2 segments. Maybe the 70% is 2 segments, everything else is the others. We should talk because that would be a fun data set to drive into.
I can give you Ashish's phone number.
Thank you.
I'll happily share it. All right, we're 2 minutes over. I want to stick to the time.
But I think I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, the content,
Yeah.
content we can always.
Got it. Maybe we can take 5 more minutes of questions and then I can hand it off to Shri. More questions? Please.
How does the user fit in your ICP? I think
Would you mind
most of
repeating
the
the question?
conversation is happening, sorry,
Yeah.
most of the conversation is happening around customer and buyer.
Yes.
There are arguments on
Yes.
customer itself and buyer itself. There are challenges to it. But
Yeah.
in addition to it, there is a piece which is a user.
100%.
Because I think down the line, I mean, you can sell, that is fine. But I think overall, I think building upsells from that point of on
Yeah.
is entirely dependent on user. What is your thought towards it?
Great question.
Thank you.
So I suspect that Rohit will get into some of this in his PLG section, but I'll just share a little bit, which is we have a customer, Crisp.ai. They're a noise canceling solution, very heavily PLG driven. And what you want to look at is these same patterns in your PLG data. You want to look at your PLG data and say, what's existing users, how much have they converted to paying customers? What specific segment has converted to paying customers? In some cases, your upsell motion will be completely online, right? You have a nurture sequence, you're sending them emails of some sort and they're upgrading. In other cases, there's a sales team involved. I know Rohit's going to get into all of this, so you should attend this session. But users 100% have a big role to play. Fundamentally, and I get into this in my outbound section also, there's 6 or 7 personas, typically, 7 stakeholders in the B2B sale. There's the champion, there's the influencer, there's procurement, there's the user, and what you have to figure out is what's the motion and what's the beachhead, where are you landing, and then how are you getting the other personas involved, engaged, at what point. And sometimes you want to start with the users, other times you don't want to start with the user because they don't have the juice that you need. Maybe they're a bigger deal on the adoption side, right, but not on the purchase side. And Shiv actually has some interesting lessons to share here also because they do a lot of PLG on their side. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of color. Other questions? One more? Yes. I talked about new execs. That's typically a good one. Funding announcements tend to be pretty good. You know, not that common these days, but hopefully it'll bounce back soon enough. Unfortunately, layoffs tend to be a pretty good signal as well, because a lot of times it means they care about cutting costs. Or there were 6 people trying to solve this problem. Now again, this could be interesting for you, which is there were 6 people trying to solve this problem. Now it's down to 1 person, so they probably will do a tech stack consolidation, or they'll cut tools and they'll still try to solve this particular problem. So that's another good one. A lot of times new product announcements tend to be buying triggers. New geographical expansions tend to be buying triggers. New regulations in a particular market tend to be buying triggers. Execs being let go or changing jobs tend to be a buying trigger as well. So there's a bunch of different things generically that fall in that bucket. What you have to ask yourself is, when you think about your last 5 deals or 10 deals, were there things that were happening at those companies that were common, that we can go look for other companies that meet that particular pattern? That's roughly the rule of thumb. Cool. Maybe one more question? If there's one more? Yeah, in the back.
So we've been able to identify our ICP1. However, we have a very disparate source of data when it comes to ICP2 and 3, so on and so forth. So one, I'd love to understand how do you segregate the spend, on different ICPs, and 2, what will be the key trigger for an ICP2 or ICP3 per se? Thank you.
Great question. A bit on the spend piece is probably better served in Neha's session on paid media. We can come back to that. But here's how you should think about rule of thumb. Early days, you can't really figure out what's ICP1 or ICP2. You probably have 2 or 3 you're starting with. There's equal allocation of resources across 2 segments. You try to figure out what works. As time goes on, we have customers that have 50 million plus, 100 million plus in revenue. They typically do one segment that's 60 to 70% of their resource allocation, and then 2 or 3 segments that are 30% odd off. And in general, in life, that's a pretty good explore-exploit combination, right? Because you're always trying to figure out, do I go to that one restaurant that I love and get that one dish that I always want, or should I try a new place, right? And that's sort of an explore-exploit problem you're trying to solve. And there's typically some ratio of 7 to 3, which is 7 times you should probably go to that restaurant and get the food you want, but 3 times you should go try something new, because you might find something that's better than what you're eating there. And that same principle applies in your case, where do a test, figure out what the response looks like, have the right set of leading and lagging indicators. Are you booking meetings? Are they becoming opportunities? Are they becoming deals? ROI is your key metric. Because at the end of the day, you might get deals there, but if that first segment, your ROI is 5x, second segment's only 2x, you'll have to keep that in mind in figuring future spend allocations. Cool. Well, we can continue some of this in the outbound session. Thank you. Appreciate the time.